welcome to Bad Ideas, the show where we look at misfires, mistakes, and miscalculations from all throughout history.
I'm Tony Southcott.
And I'm Albert Berg, and for the bad idea that I have for you guys this week, we're taking you back to the mid-1950s.
There were a lot of bad ideas back then.
Yeah, there were, Tony, and I want you to imagine this, all right? You're driving along in your car. You're by yourself. You want some tunes.
Does it have like the fishtail lights or whatever? That
Absolutely.
Like, nice Cadillac? Sweet.
You're able to afford a Cadillac for some reason, Tony.
And just white wall tires.
It's gorgeous. Yeah. You're in a rolling, I was going to say mausoleum, but that's a dead person thing. I don't know. It's a nice, a temple. Some kind of fancy building that is a car.
I'm in my fancy boat because it's a big old boat that can store 4 bodies in the trunk. It's nice.
And so you want to listen to some music, and you turn it on, and it turns out, Tony, that the DJ at your local radio station does not enjoy the death metal that you, as a 1955 consumer of music, really crave.
Would that be like Elvis or something back then?
Possibly. You're at the mercy of the guy dropping the needle at the radio station. That's the only music that is in your car at this time, is the radio. And Chrysler decides they want to change that. And there had been huge changes in the pre-recorded music industry basically for the previous decade up until this point. The LP record had made its debut about 5 years earlier, and it made music so much easier to own and listen to at home. Before the LP, you were limited to very short, they had these 78 RPM records that were kind of giant and also very brittle, and you would put them on, and it was essentially a single, but almost the same size as an LP record, for those of you who have any context for this at all. An LP is a pretty giant disc, but compared to the other stuff that was happening at the day, it was actually a really compact way of owning music. And it was a technological breakthrough. The fact that they were able to squeeze that much music on an analog system like that was a huge deal, and Chrysler wanted to get in on this music revolution, and they hired the guy, Peter Goldmark, who had cracked the technological challenges that made the LP record possible. And they wanted him to design a system that would let you listen to your own music not only in the confines of your home, but on the open road.
By the way, an LP is 12 inches, so you're looking at a full foot per disc.
Yes, but it is 45 minutes of music, approximately, sometimes even a little bit longer. So that's not bad. And in 1956, the fruit of Peter Goldmark's genius began appearing in Chrysler automobiles. And Chrysler called this invention the highway hi-fi. And you've never heard of this, most likely, because it was a failure. I had never heard of it until I started researching this idea. But the technology itself was actually pretty incredible. An LP record of the time was able to hold about 40 minutes of music, 20 on each side, because it turned slower than other records, about 33.5 revolutions per minute, and because its grooves were packed closer together, as much as 300 grooves per inch. Now, if you need a reference point, think about the jump in quality between a DVD and a Blu-ray. They're the same size disc, but if you put the little dots closer together, you're able to get more information on them. This was the equivalence of putting these dots very close together on an LP, and the highway hi-fi goes even further. It spins at 16 revolutions per minute and has 550 grooves per inch, allowing them to hold an hour's worth of content per side on these records.
That's definitely an improvement.
It was unlike anything else available at the time. It was brilliant, okay? I cannot overstate the revolutionary nature of this technology, and it was gone within 3 years.
What happened?
Well, for starters, it was expensive. The system cost $200 at the time, which translates into something like $1,700 of today money just to have music in your car that was not the radio. So you had to really dislike what was being played on the radio to shell out that kind of money to listen to your own music. And let's say you do that. Let's say you do shell out the big bucks for this fancy new system. Now you're free to listen to whatever, right? Now you can just go hog wild and listen to all your favorite artists and their songs. No, you cannot. Because the music that you already own in the other formats won't work with your fancy new record player. So LPs are not going to play on this thing. Your 45's not going to work. Your old 78's, none of that's going to work. They're going to sound super wonky if you can even fit them in the system. So you have to rebuy all of your favorite music. And even then, you're very limited on what you can get because Chrysler had an exclusive deal with the Columbia Record Company for the new format, which meant you could only listen to artists which had a contract with the Columbia Record Company, and then only the ones that they felt like releasing in this new special exclusive format.
I was about to ask, like, were there people buying these for, like, the home, the hi-fi systems? But it sounds like because of all these restrictions, people really wouldn't have.
Well, they were also pre-installed in a Chrysler. As far as I know, it was never available as an aftermarket thing that you could stick in a car. It came with the car, and that might have made the price a little bit easier to swallow, but I think it just wasn't worth it for a lot of people. There were some pretty big names that did have this system. Muhammad Ali had one in his car. There were several other famous people, and especially musicians from the era. I believe Elvis might have had one at the time. So it was trendy. They were trying to get out there, and I assume with the people with high caliber names like that, they probably got it for free, Tony. So
probably.
They could be seen,
especially if they had a Columbia record contract.
Especially that. But it never quite caught on because of this limitations in availability. We've kind of run into this issue before, right? Where if you have a new technology that doesn't have a lot of support, then you're not going to get a lot of adoption, right? The same problem that they had with Betamax. Everybody talks about how much better Betamax was than VHS, or at least they did back in the day when that was a thing. But VHS had the deals with the movie companies, and so VHS got the adoption because you had the supply to match the demand for the media. And here you just don't have that. And on top of that, despite the fact that the actual technology of recording the music onto the records was revolutionary, the systems themselves tended to be a little unreliable. And because it was proprietary technology, when your highway hi-fi inevitably broke down, you couldn't just take it to any local shop and have it repaired. You had to go to the dealer. And that was the beginning of the recipe for the failed format.
Plus, whenever it's exclusive like that, you don't have other companies innovating with that technology to make it better.
No, and the interesting thing was, Highway Hi-Fi as a specific branded product does go under after about 3 years. People keep trying to make this work with records. So almost immediately after Highway Hi-Fi has the plug pulled, RCA decides they're going to do their own take on this concept. They see these pitfalls of having proprietary technology, and they're like, we're not doing that. So we're going to go with our own way, and we're going to have this work with your 45 RPM records. All right, those are the little singles. Again, for those of you who are familiar with records at all, the smaller records that spin a little bit faster. And this gets you around the music supply problem. But there's another problem with this system in that because you're playing your records from home that were designed to work on a nice, really well-balanced turntable, this needle that they developed, in order to keep from skipping as you drove down the road and hit potholes and stuff, had to press very hard against these records and would ultimately wear them out pretty quickly.
Yeah, imagine whenever you're going down the road, there's just going to be so many bumps. Even a hard turn or something like that would drive that needle deeper into the record.
which was another brilliant part of the highway hi-fi thing that, yes, it probably would have worn out records eventually, but they actually took all of that into account. They tried to make the records harder and to protect them against this increased wear because of the increased pressure of the needle. The RCA thing eventually does also fade out, and you got to imagine we're on the cusp of having cassette tapes, but we're not quite there yet. And the one thing I didn't mention about the RCA technology was they had a queue. So you would put a stack of 45 RPM records and it would drop them one at a time and play, and you would have these things go through. So you could still have a decent run of music, but it didn't catch on. And finally, we have the worst iteration of this concept. And I don't know how they go from the highway hi-fi, which is the best possible iteration, to the absolute worst. But the Norelco Auto Mignon, mignon spelled like filet mignon,
Getting all steak up in your car.
was a take on this record player in your car concept that played 45 RPM records, but only one at a time. And an RPM record holds about 3 minutes of music. So you're essentially going down the road having to swap out a new record every single time the song ends.
Or you better get really happy with that one song.
Or just keep repeating it over and over again. And again, still wearing that record out pretty fast because of the pressure of the needle required to not have it jump and skip as you drive down the road.
Or at least by the time you actually wear the record out, you probably never want to hear it again.
The Norelco Auto Mignon failed, and so did the entire concept of playing records in your car. And eventually we got better stuff, Tony. Eventually we did figure out the cassette and the cassette tape and the 8-track.
Yeah, the 8-track looks like it came out in the mid-60s.
And it's interesting to see them trying to solve this problem before they have cheap enough tape to make this work. I follow a lot of retro YouTube channels, and one of the guys that I follow does retro audio stuff. It's a channel called Techmoan, and he does a lot of old audio format stuff and talks a lot about the mechanics of how tapes worked at the time and tape technology. And it's a really interesting innovation that we eventually got to before we got to CDs and things. It was the best that we could do for portable music, and it was a really interesting technology. It just took them a while to get there, and they tried this record in your car concept for a while. I gotta think, I have to wonder if the highway hi-fi had better support for more music, if it might not have taken off more, because there was kind of a format war with the records for a while where you had 45s and you had the LP records and you had the 78s. And there was a lot of different technology that was being developed concurrently that eventually solidified into one thing. This could have been something big, but it just ended up not being widely enough adopted or reliable enough to make Chrysler any money.
Yeah, and I know that the consoles would have had to be, or would have had to have been pretty well modified to be able to fit something like this, to put a 12-inch disc in there. But you have to think that having the option to put it in other cars other than just brand new Chryslers could have really had an impact here. Like, if you would have been able to put this in your truck or in your standard car at the time, you might have seen the adoption go way up, which would slowly cause the price to drop, which would make the disc more ubiquitous. Like, there could have been a lot of things that led to this expanding.
But we didn't. We got the 8-track instead. And that is why the highway hi-fi was a bad idea. That is all I have for this week, Tony. It was a short one. It was over the Christmas break as we were studying, and I did not want to get into a giant deep dive with something that I'd have to read a whole book on. So y'all got the highway hi-fi. I hope that you enjoyed it. At the very least, it was interesting to me to read about it because it was just a complete blind spot in my knowledge of audio formats of the past. And as I mentioned, I'm kind of at least interested in the study of those audio formats, having followed several YouTube channels that talk about audio and retro things, and had never come across this before. And I think it's fascinating.
It really was. I had no idea about it before. I'm looking forward to Googling some images afterwards just to see what this console looked like.
You can Google. People still have working versions of this in their cars, and I've seen videos of people on YouTube playing records through their car stereo from the Highway Hi-Fi. It's some of them still work, I guess, but they're very, very rare, I would imagine, at this point.
Finding the disc must have been really hard too. Like even today, like you'd have to go pretty far into eBay or places like that to find these.
You would have to be an insanely dedicated collector, which I am not, but I do enjoy that other people are, and I was able to find some videos of people playing around with this thing. And that's it. That's it for this week. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you like this episode, don't forget we have a Patreon page over at patreon.com/humanechoes, and you can get a lot of our stuff there early. As far as our YouTube content goes, you can get the bonus podcast, which is us just sort of blathering on for about an hour. It's
our
a lot of fun.
show. It's a lot of fun.
And you can get our eternal gratitude if you support us over there for as little as $2 a month. Thank you so much for listening. If you have not subscribed to this podcast, do that now, and we will see you guys next week with another Bad Ideas podcast show thing.
Bye.
Bye.